When we are seaming shoulder seams, we're going to use mattress stitch like we always do, only we have 2 layers. So if we would seam one side, then when we pull the yarn to close the seam, then our selvage stitches are going to be pushed to the other side. So when we will come to the opposite side, we're going to have 2 selvage stitches on each side, and that's impossible to cover nicely. So what we want to do is to seam simultaneously both sides and about 1 inch on each side with one of each color. And then when we pull the yarn, we're going to pull carefully one side, and the seaming on the other side will prevent the edge stitches to go through. And then it's easier to keep the edge stitches between the layers, between the pieces, and have a nice clean seam on both sides. We're going to use the dark color on the side that's mainly dark and the light color on the side that is mainly light. So I am going to use 2 needles because I'm working simultaneously. You can switch the needle and thread each thread all the time, but it's easier to just have 1 needle on each color. And this will be my light color, my light seam, and the other one will be, the other side will be my dark seam. So let's begin. So what I'm looking for when I'm seaming mattress stitch, I want my seaming to be seamlessly. So I want the flow of the stitches. If my stitches here, this piece was worked from the cast on to the bind off, and my stitches are opening to the right, I want to have this column continue here as well. But here, the column, we can see here that the stitches that are opening to the same direction are actually a space between 2 stitches. This leg belongs to this stitch, the dark stitch, and this leg belongs to the light stitch. So we are actually have to move one leg from one side to the other. This is how mattress stitch work. So let's see the actual seaming. We're looking for the first column of stitches that are facing towards the bind off chain, and make sure that you have cast ons on the other sides and bind offs together. So we have this chains of bind offs and they need to face each other. I'm going to begin with the left side, and the first column is a light column. I want to find the center of the V that is facing to the bind off and enter from back to front, but not through the back layer. Just between the layers, I'm going to find the first stitch and I'm going to insert my needle to the center of the V. That is, it's supposed to be right under the first bind off chain. And I'm going to pull the yarn. And now I'm going to the other side. So I'm looking for the first V that is facing to the same direction. Now my first column of stitches is here and it is facing towards the bind off, but I want to take one leg of this stitch and then the other leg of the stitch next to it. So when I'm inserting my needle, I'm going to select the first two legs of the stitch that is facing down to the right. If this stitch faces to the right, then this stitch also needs to be facing to the same direction, which means I'm going to have half a stitch here, and that's fine. I'm skipping half a stitch, one leg of the stitch that is actually the first one. And I'm going to pull my yarn. And now I kind of have an anchor to show me where to go in the stitches on both sides, because I will always come back to the same stitch that I started with, to the same center of the same stitch, and go out. I'm going to go into the next column of stitches. So if this is the center of my first stitch, then I'm going to go under the left leg of this stitch, under the right leg of the second stitch next to it, and come out at the center of that stitch, the dark stitch. And I'm not pulling the yarn yet. I want to have a very, very open seam, because I first have to do the same on the other side. Now I'm going to go under two legs of the next stitch. It's not a real stitch, but it looks like a stitch that is facing to the right. And it has one dark leg and one light leg, because it's actually between the dark stitch and the light stitch. So it's half of the dark stitch and half of the light stitch. I'm looking for the top stitch. I want to go right underneath the chain, the bind of chain, and I'm looking where my yarn is coming out of, and this will be the leg that I'm going to pick up underneath this leg of the dark stitch and underneath one leg of the next stitch. So I'm kind of under a stitch that is facing to the right. I can see the V that is opening to the right, although it's half of the dark stitch and half of the light stitch. And I'm going to pull the yarn through. And once again, I'm going to go back to where I started here, where my yarn comes out of. I'm going to go into the center of the stitch and out of the center of the next stitch. And on this side, I'm going to go into the center of this stitch and out of the center of the next stitch, but actually under the stitch that is facing to the right, the V that is opening to the right. And we've made maybe about an inch, and maybe one more stitch, and then we're going to go to the other side. Okay, so I'm still not pulling the yarn. Still, the stitches are very elongated, and that's fine. Let's turn our work to the other side, and we're going to do the same on this side. So my yarn is connected to this side. I want to start with the left side. I'm going to find the first stitch that is opening, the first V that is opening towards the bind off chain. And I'm going to go into the center of that stitch, that first stitch. And from here, I'm going to go to find the center of the V that is opening to the right, which is one leg of the first stitch and one leg of the second stitch. I'm going to go under both legs, the right leg of the first stitch and the left leg of the right stitch. And this means that I'm under two legs of a stitch that is opening to the right, to the same direction. And again, I'm going to go into the center of the first stitch and out of the center of the stitch next to it. And on this side, I'm going to go to where my yarn is coming out of, under both legs, under two legs of a V that is opening to the right. And into the center of the stitch that's my yarn is coming out of, and underneath the leg into the center of a stitch next to it. And I almost went to this column, but if I look closely, I can see that this column opens to the left, which means this is not a stitch. I need that stitch that is opening to the right. And let's do one more. So I'm coming into where my yarn is, under two legs, and I'm pulling my yarn. And last one, I'm going into the center of the stitch and out under two legs and out of the center of the next stitch. And now we can see that we have the beginning of a nice columns. We can really see that these columns, the stitches are facing to the right, and it's continuing all the way to the other piece. And we see that our stitches are fine, and we have the stitches on both sides, so we can begin to pull the yarn. Now this yarn is a little bit weak. It's not, if I will pull it too much, it's going to tear. So I'm really careful with this yarn, and I'm going to carefully pull from the first stitch and second stitch. So I'm doing it very, very carefully. If your yarn is more sturdy, you can just pull everything and it will close up the seam. But because my yarn is delicate, I prefer to do it in a more delicate manner. So I closed one seam, and it's very, very nice. And when I look at the other side, I can see that everything is concealed under my seam. And my seam prevented everything to come out. So I'm going to do the same with the light yarn. I'm going to pull carefully, not to tear my yarn. And make the seam as tight as I can. If you were to pull the mattress stitch on a regular knitting, then you will be able to see that the yarn gets straight and everything connects to each other. But here we have a lot of bulk in between the seams. So don't worry if you have this like a new line here of stitches, because it does need a little bit of space to hold all the edges underneath. And that's fine, it looks really, really nice. So don't worry about it. If you do the seaming correctly, then it's gonna look fine. So we can continue after we pull the yarn a little bit, we can continue with the seaming. I see where my yarn is coming out of this stitch, so I know that I need to go to the other side. I'm looking for where my bind off chain is. I'm looking for the next V that is opening to the right, and I'm gonna go under both legs of the V that is opening to the right. And I still keep it open because I haven't seen the other side. And I'm going into the same hole where my yarn is coming out of, and I'm coming under the legs into the stitch next to it. And again, underneath two legs of a V that is opening to the right, and into a V that is opening to the right, under the legs, and I'm coming out of the next V, next stitch. Let's do another one under the legs, two legs of a V that is opening to the right, and into the same stitch under the legs, into the next stitch. And let's turn to the other side before we are pulling the yarn. And we're going to do the other side. We are in the center of a stitch, and I'm looking for the first V that is facing to the right, under both legs, and into the same stitch and out of the next stitch, the center of the next stitch. Underneath two legs of a stitch that is facing to the right, and into the center of the same stitch, out of the center of the next stitch. And again under two legs of a V that is facing to the right. And into the same stitch under the legs and out of the center of the next stitch. And we have enough on each side. We can pull the yarn a little bit and close as much as we can. And on the other side, I'm also going to pull a little bit, close it as much as I can, and I'm going to use my needle to close the stitch because I'm scared to pull it too tight. If your yarn is sturdy, you can just pull it and close the seam. And this is how we're going to do the shoulder seams, and it looks very, very nice on both sides.